I just want to explain first a little bit about myself and why I've come to have this conversation today. So I've suffered with anxiety probably coming up about 15 years now. When I was 21, I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. I was an undergrad at the time. I was writing my dissertation, and it was quite a traumatic, event to happen. Now, I think I didn't seek any treatment at the time. I didn't think I needed it. But as the years went on, I did a lot of exercise, and I think personally that's how I sort of managed my mental health without realising that I had an issue there. Things only really sort of came to a head when I had the children. So I had Isabella 7 years ago now, Rosie's 3. And when I had Isabella, I stopped doing exercise. And it's really sort of been over the last 7 years that I've had to actually seek help for the anxiety. A lot of my anxiety became around responsibility for other people, having a responsibility for other people. So whether that Isabella, whether that be in my job, I worked as a physiotherapist at the time in the NHS, and I'd take those patients home with me, and at night I wouldn't sleep properly. And it just got to the point where I thought I needed to get some help. I don't think I'm alone in this. I think it's a huge area that is being talked about more and more now, mental health. I think children can especially affect our mental health, whether that's through, as with me, it changing your lifestyle and therefore changing how you can manage things, or whether it's actually the problem you have with in a relationship with your children. So I've got today a cognitive behavioural psychotherapist, Heather Howard-Thompson, who's going to talk to us a little bit about what she does. Hello.
Hi.
Hi, Heather. How are you?
I'm all right. How are you?
Yeah, very well, thank you. I'm good.
Good.
So, Heather, can you explain to me a little bit about Yorkshire Psychotherapy?
I set up about 5 years ago. Can't believe it's 5 years already. And we're based in Barnsley, but we do offer online work for all over the country, really. And I started off in the NHS. I worked like 20 years in the NHS. I was a mental health nurse and trained in cognitive behaviour therapy and EMDR for trauma as well. So it's interesting you mentioned about trauma. So that's something that I offer as well, which is really popular. And
what does EMDR stand for?
So EMDR stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. So that's why we call it EMDR. It's a bit of a mouthful. It's in the NICE guidelines and recommended treatment for trauma and PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. Right. It's great. I had EMDR a number of years ago, and that made me go and train in it because it works so well. I thought, wow, what is this? It's amazing. So I went and trained in it. So that's what I offer. But I've got a team that work with me of associate therapists, all people that I've either worked with or know of, so really sort of good team of experienced practitioners, and we offer a range of different therapies, mainly CBT and EMDR. We have a couple of counsellors, psychologists, and we have some children therapists as well that are trained in sort of play therapy, drama. We've got a drama therapist, an art therapist, so I've got a wide range of experience, so we try and sort of help as many people as we can.
My personal experiences, I have been sort of referred by my GP in the past. I've sort of continually gone a little bit like a roundabout in and out of services when it came to NHS referrals. I'd get referred, I'd go in, I'd have an initial consultation, then they'd say to me, when you come back, you've got a different therapist. So I'd go, and then I'd realise with my work schedule that I needed to do an evening appointment, not a daytime one, and that meant that I had to be put back on the waiting list and things like this. So I know in the end I ended up going privately because I thought I need to be more in control of this than I can be through the NHS. Can you explain from a private practitioner's point of view, what's the main differences between private psychotherapy and cognitive behavioural therapy and seeking it through the NHS?
Okay, the main difference is really the flexibility around when you have the sessions. You can choose who you want. And it's a bit like if you want to see a physio or a dentist, you can either have an NHS one or you choose to go private. So it's exactly the same. You can work flexibly around what you want and who you want to see. And you can also work on what you want to, because when it comes to the NHS, they've got massive waiting lists, and it's, they've got such a demand and such a need for mental health issues. So people have like a limited amount of sessions, whereas when you access private therapy, you can work on maybe different parts. So say you had trauma, but also excessive worry, you could work on both of those things as well. So people tend to enjoy private therapy. The downside being that you have to pay for it, and obviously not everybody's in a position to pay for it, so that also puts blocks up for people as well. We always try and help people as much as we can, so I'll try and signpost people, or sometimes can offer reduced rates, so we do what we can to help people.
When would you recommend that somebody seek private therapy as opposed to going through the NHS?
It depends on how unwell you're feeling, and whether if you go and see a GP initially, sometimes you can get help pretty quickly depending on your area, depending on what's on offer, because sometimes you can be offered group work. But if you really feel that you're wanting to talk through things, the sooner that you do that rather than later, the better, really. Because if you access help early on, then you are going to be generally much quicker in recovery than sort of leaving it and waiting 12 months down the line and then starting treatment.
I think I knew I needed to, because I'd got to the point where I couldn't think clearly. I couldn't remember things. I just had post-it notes. I remember being at work and I had post-it notes piling out of my pockets because I was paranoid that I was going to forget something. I was really snappy at home as well. That was sort of, it's funny with anxiety, I think. It's like people think, oh, you're anxious, that you must be quite weedy. But I was the opposite. I was like feisty, so snappy about anything, so quick-tempered. So those are the sorts of things that I obviously saw as indicators. For someone who's never sought help before, what sort of things should they expect if they contact you?
Okay, so obviously we've got some of the problems that you might identify with, and lots of people can identify with those things, feeling particularly stressed. And so if you decide that you contact therapy and you're wanting private therapy, we usually carry out an assessment session first, asking lots of questions. So finding out what's happening, what situation you're in, what might have led to why you're feeling as you are, what symptoms you're experiencing, what you want to get out of therapy, so what you're wanting to achieve. And then in CBT, cognitive behaviour therapy, we do something called a formulation. So we start to make sense and formulate what it is your problem is. Map it out. I've got a big piece of paper, a really big clipboard, and map it out to try and make sense of it. And that can help us sort of guide the treatment plan. So we're hoping by the end of the first session, we can give you an idea as to what the recommended treatment would be. We can use what we call a transdiagnostic approach. So we can, if someone has panic attacks, anxiety and low mood, we can look at the person as a whole and work out a treatment plan for them based on their issues. Or if they've got problems with low self-esteem, we might do some compassion work. So you can really get to the bottom of things for people, because often people that I see will have had lots of therapy before. Not saying that it's not help, but it might help for that moment, and then they find that they end up going back again in a couple of years. And what I like to do is really get to the bottom of where things stem from and try and help people to sort themselves out once and for all, and that they might only need the odd top up now and again. There's nothing wrong with accessing therapy, but obviously, you don't want to keep having to go, and especially if you're paying for it, it's better if you can just maybe get things sorted. And that's what's so different about private therapy, I think, that you can do that if you get the right person.
Yeah, and almost just check in then, can't you? It's very like American way of doing it, isn't it? Like everyone in America seems to have a therapist, don't they? But it kind of makes sense. It's like someone just to keep that thought process on the right lines. And if you are prone to having sort of negative thoughts and worrying and things like that, it's somebody to help keep that in check for you.
Yeah,
I read on your site that you see children, teens as well as adults. What sort of situations would people seek psychotherapy for a child, and would the parent go to the session with them?
Right, yeah, so we do see children and teenagers. I don't see young children, but some of the team do. We get children that have problems with low mood, often with worry and anxiety, and sometimes they've been through trauma as well. And with teenagers, it's usually difficulties around like emotional regulation, self-harming, a range of different problems. There's so much pressure on kids these days to, for exams and SATs and stuff. If you've got a child that's a bit of a worrier anyway, that the anxiety can come out much earlier than maybe it used to do. So we see people for a range of different problems. Our child therapists tend to work with the families as well, because it's important that it's sort of it's a team approach. So our therapists work with the families to enable them to support their child as well.
In the situation where you've got a teenager that doesn't want the parents to come into the session, are they protected by confidentiality?
To a degree, but we always let them know that if there were any risk or anything that we're really concerned about, that we would have to speak to the parents. So whenever I work with a teenager, I always sort of set off on that footing where I try and get mum or dad to come in, or whoever's with them, explain that if I've got any concerns, I will feed back. But I usually do it in front of the teenager as well, and get an agreement between us. If anybody said anything that put them at risk, then I'd have to break confidentiality anyway, and I let them know that. So it's all sort of agreed at the beginning when we start. We have a client's agreement. I've usually not found it a problem particularly, but sometimes parents might want to know more than teenagers want them to, which is understandable. So I've got a 14-year-old, so I know what it's like. You might want to know everything, so I make sure that I'm clear with the parents as well about what I can and cannot tell them.
So you won't engage in small talk about the session with parents, but if there's an issue that is serious and you need to disclose it to the parents, then you will do.
Yes, yeah, and usually I will say, shall we get, so if someone brings say the mum's waiting outside, shall we get your mum in and let's agree what we're going to tell her about today? Shall we explain what we're going to do and what our plan is, so that it doesn't feel really secretive?
I recently interviewed Dr. Victoria Kromova. She's a child psychiatrist.
Yes.
And she's a parent coach. She offers support on courses. Can you describe to me the difference between a child psychiatrist and a child psychologist?
Yeah. Well, a psychologist and a psychiatrist are both doctors. They've just got doctorates in different areas. A psychotherapist or cognitive behavioural psychotherapist that works with children is different, and it's just a different training basically. So they've got a postgraduate diploma, cognitive behavioural psychotherapists. So psychiatrists are usually have a medical background, so they usually prescribe medication, whereas psychologists and therapists don't prescribe medication. So we don't have anything to do with medication. So that's the main difference. But I think then with coaching, often psychiatrists will often do therapy as well alongside, so they might do both. So I know quite a few psychiatrists, and we refer on to psychiatrists as well. So if someone needs medication, we refer on to psychiatry. We haven't got one in the team, but we have got people that we can refer on. So I'll have to get in touch with with Victoria and somebody pass on, in case we need to.
Speak to the GP, then come to you guys. Quite an easy open door, and then if we feel that somebody needs medication, we will refer on to people, and if we can't offer what someone needs, we'll signpost to someone that can. So, whilst you're on the video, I'd love to pick your brains. The problem I'm having at the moment is with my 7-year-old daughter is bedwetting. When I try and talk to her about it, she brings up the separation between me and her dad. She says she's upset that the dad left, and that her dad left, and she asks some really difficult questions. Her dad takes the stance on her being too young to understand, don't get dragged into conversation about it, and not engage with her. Whereas I obviously they're with me 90% of the time, I kind of get dragged into these conversations where I sort of find myself explaining how daddy didn't love mummy anymore, and things like this. And I'm a bit concerned that he's right and she's too young to understand this. What advice would you give to people in this situation where they can see there's an effect, physical effect on their child from a relationship separation? What advice could you give?
There's some good books about sort of divorce and separation on Amazon for kids, and so there's some specific sort of like age related. I know I got one, and it can be a bit difficult as a mum maybe to go through it with them, but it can really help sort of normalise the situation and know what they're going through. One's called "It's Not Your Fault."
Oh, nice.
Have a look. Yeah.
And as well, in the last video I did, my friend talking about her neonate, he sort of is showing a number of sort of ADHD signifiers or whatever, and they've got a book called The Red Beast, and it's how children cope with feeling angry and how to bring themselves out of a tantrum and things like that.
Yeah, there's some really good books for kids. There's one now called Divorce Is Not the End of the World. So that looks for like a bit older children. There's one called The Invisible String. That's really good. There's one called Mum and Dad Glue. So talk, how we still glued together, that the child brings their parents together no matter what and things. So I think talking about it when they're young is really useful, without going into too much detail, but just so that they're able to ask questions if they need to. We get lots of people contacting us about this situation, because obviously it's common and it's really difficult, particularly when you have parents with different ideas about what you should do, and you can't, how do you get, you both work together for the sake of the child, and it's difficult, isn't it? So I've had a word with our child psychologist and therapist to get some ideas for you about this. Bedwetting, it can be a symptom of sort of emotional change and separation, and kids can often grow out of it, but if you felt that things weren't moving on, she had the opportunity to talk about how she's feeling and she was still struggling, then sometimes sort of therapy or getting a bit of help and giving her someone else to talk to, because she might be trying to sort of protect you and her dad. So kids, they are really resilient. So, but it's just making sure she's got that platform. So if her dad doesn't want to talk to her about it, just as long as you've got sort of chance to sort of maybe on an evening say to her, what sort of day have you had? What have you had? Give it a rating out of 10. You can do all sorts of things. Just sort of make it fun and give you a chance to talk about it. So, and I guess for her to know that you both still love her, that it's a difficult time, but you're both still there for her. And what can we do to make things better so that she feels that she can talk about how she's feeling. From my own experience of divorce and going through the same thing, and it's very difficult, because I don't think there's a manual particularly, so you don't know what's for the best. And with my son, when he was younger, he didn't always tell me. So so I started saying to him, tell me one good thing about what happened today, and then tell me one thing that weren't so good that happened today. And then, so trying to make it a bit of a game rather than a feeling that you have to tell, they have to tell you how they're feeling and stuff. So that's a few ideas. I hope that helps.
For those people that are sort of in a situation like I've just described, they did go ahead and they wanted to have therapy and discuss things together. How would that work as things stand at the moment? Because as things stand at the moment, it's online. So Neil and I struggle to be in the same room as each other sometimes, so I'm not sure how therapy sat side by side at a computer would work. So in those situations, how would sort of group therapy work online?
With Zoom, it's brilliant. So you can have, you don't have to be in the same place. So you just invite, you can both, if you're having therapy together?
Yeah,
so
you do that way.
You could we do it like that, and on Zoom you can have breakout rooms. So if you wanted to have a little bit of a breather, you can come up with sort of signs to say, right, let's put you in a breakout room and give you 5 minutes if it gets a bit heated. I think we've been doing it for so long, we're really good at doing Zoom stuff. I can do all sorts now. So there's ways around it. And And people, again, find it more useful than maybe seeing people face to face, because it's not as threatening, because you're not actually there with the person. So it can be a bit easier. You can have notes of things you want to say, and that can help as well. So yeah, so I think it works really well on Zoom.
If you could give one bit of advice to parents that are struggling now, if you bear in mind that it's been since March, a lot of parents are, particularly single parents, have been locked down with their kids at home for this whole time. Tension might be building. What advice would you give to parents that are struggling to cope with things at the moment?
One piece of advice. I did some videos on this for parents that are at school. I think the main thing is to breathe and to try and have a bit of space if you can. Because I think, I've just got one son, and sometimes I'm like, because he's 14 and he's annoying. But, if you've got young kids, it's draining, it's tiring, isn't it? So I would, wherever you can, try and have a bit of a breather, have some time for you, particularly if kids have got out of the routine for bedtime, get them back into the routine now in preparation, like start, so that you've got a bit of time on an evening when they're in bed, getting them doing things, and while they're doing stuff, you're trying to have a break, and, trying to take some time out and practice some exercises where you can just sort of ground yourself back in here and now if you're getting sort of really worked up. Really, really useful things to do. I've got a Facebook page, and on there there's some videos, some mindfulness videos on there. So if anybody wants to, there's some you can play them back. There's some for kids, some for adults. So there's some on there that I did at the beginning of lockdown when I lost all my work and I was like, got loads of time. I'm really busy now. So and that can be really useful. So just I would say breathe and take some time for yourself as much as you can. And I know it's not easy, but kids will be back at school soon. Hurrah!
Well, it's been lovely talking to you.
Yes, you too.
Wish you all the success with the online future of Yorkshire Psychotherapy.
Thank you. It's a change, but we've adapted well, and it's going well. And feedback has been great, because people can do it like when they're, when they finish working, when kids are in bed. I've even done it with people sat in the car, so they've got a bit of privacy. They go sit on the car and drive and FaceTiming and stuff. So whatever works is great.
I'd say the therapy I've had through lockdown has been online, and I found it easier. And I think even if all the sort of lockdown rules got relaxed, I'd opt to carry on doing it online. I think you don't have to think about childcare, you don't have to think about parking, and
that's travelling time, all that. It is easier, I think so. And you can have your pajamas on and nobody need ever know.